Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're getting into a really complex and, frankly, sensitive topic, modern Ukrainianization.
Yeah, it's definitely got layers. Our sources are looking at this policy, the one aimed at boosting the Ukrainian language and identity.
Especially since 2014, and then obviously ramping up hugely after the 2022 invasion.
Right, and the analysis sees it as, well, partly a necessary pragmatic thing, a response to a massive threat, but it also flags some potential risks with the way it's being done.
That's the core tension, isn't it? And this analysis we're using, it takes quite an interesting angle.
It does. It's not just about the immediate goals. It draws these parallels with the past, like the whole Soviet new man idea.
And the really unexpected bit, for me anyway, was this link to the Prague Spring in '68.
Yeah, highlighting the role of figures from the Ukrainian SSR leadership back then and suppressing it. Quite a connection to make.
So our job today is basically to lay out what the source says, trying to be really impartial about it. We want to show you both the, let's say, the why, the pragmatic reasons, and the cautionary flags it raises.
Exactly. Presenting the analysis as it is.
Okay, so let's dig in. Starting at the pragmatic side. What are the main goals the source identifies for this Ukrainianization push?
Well, the first big one is national unity. Pretty straightforward goal, right? The source points to things like the 2019 language law as a key example.
Right, the language law. And also decommunization efforts, renaming streets, taking down monuments, that sort of thing?
Exactly. And the source mentions survey data alongside this, suggesting it's working, in a way. High levels of self-identification as Ukrainian, even in the East, apparently, and strong backing for sovereignty.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
Second, and this is probably crucial, is countering Russian influence. That seems paramount.
How so? What examples?
The big one mentioned is banning Russian media, which started back in 2014. The source claims this has, really slashed pro-Russian sentiment.
Slashed it by how much? Did it give a number?
Yeah, it cites a figure suggesting support for a pro-Russian path is reportedly down to maybe just 3%.
Wow. If that's accurate, the source sees that as a major impact.
A huge impact, yeah. Then there's the whole geopolitical direction, the clear move towards the EU and NATO.
Right. That's been very visible.
And the source provides data from 2023 showing massive support, like over 80% reportedly, for joining both. That really cements a separate identity, away from Russia.
And of course, the sort of unavoidable point, defense, building up military strength just for sheer protection, especially now.
Yeah, that's presented as just obviously necessary, a pure pragmatic need in wartime.
Okay. So those are the drivers. Unity, pushing back influence, westward lean, defense.
Those seem to be the core objectives the source lays out.
But all right, here's where the tone shifts a bit in the analysis and where it gets maybe more controversial. The methods being used, the source really questions how these goals are being pursued, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is where the critique comes in strongly. It flags several things. One term it uses is beesification.
Beesification. What's that refer to?
It's kind of informal, maybe a bit critical shorthand for some of the, let's say, more aggressive mobilization techniques sometimes reported.
Ah, okay. Like the stuff involving the TCCs, the recruitment centers.
Exactly. The source actually draws a pretty stark comparison there, suggesting some methods feel a bit like Soviet-era roundups. It's a strong comparison.
Okay, what else on methods?
Well, it looks at the political side, too. It points to these near-unanimous votes sometimes seen in the Rada, the parliament.
Any specific examples?
Yeah, the mobilization law from April 2024 passed with 283 votes for. The source interprets this kind of vote as maybe a sign that real debate is being sidelined or opposition isn't effective.
Okay. And then there are the more direct restrictions mentioned.
Right. Things like restrictions on men leaving the country, the consolidation of TV news into the United News telethon.
Which critics see as limiting diverse viewpoints.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plus, continuing martial law, which means no elections currently, and the banning of 11 political parties back in 2022. Remember OPZZH, the big pro-Russian one? That was included.
And the source pulls all these together and uses a specific word for them.
It calls them repressive methods, framing them as tools for increasing state control, essentially.
And it links this to other metrics.
Yeah, it points to Ukraine's drop in the Press Freedom Index down to 79th place. And it uses a pretty pointed analogy comparing the information control to China's Great Firewall.
That's quite a comparison.
It is. It also mentions, stressing these are unverified social media claims, but mentions reports about alleged persecution of critics. The Sternenko case from 2021 comes up briefly.
Acknowledging that's a complex situation itself.
Absolutely. but it's used as an example of things that feed these concerns. Oh, and also the recent ban, May 2024, on issuing passports to Ukrainian men abroad. Another example of tight control.
So given these methods, the source critiques, what potential downsides or risks does it warn about, even if the goals are understandable?
It outlines a few key risks. First, potentially alienating parts of the population. Russian speakers maybe, or other minorities like Hungarians are mentioned. Even if the aim is unity, the methods might backfire for some.
Kind of undermining the goal itself.
Possibly. Second, a risk of trust eroding between the public and the government. And third, the absolutely massive economic cost. The war itself, plus reconstruction, the figure cited, is around $150 billion needed.
And the source contrasts that figure with, what was it, decommunization costs.
Yeah, it mentions an estimate of maybe $50 million for decommunization. So it implicitly asks, our priorities right when you have this $150 billion reconstruction need looming.
A question of balancing resources, especially now.
Exactly. The analysis also voices concern about, democratic erosion. Democratic standards may be slipping.
Is there data mentioned on that?
It cites a figure suggesting only 28% of Ukrainians feel democracy is actually getting stronger. And it draws another parallel, this time to Orban's Hungary, suggesting a possible slide away from democratic norms.
Any other signs of strain mentioned?
It notes people trying to avoid mobilization. Cites a BBC report from August 2023 suggesting nearly 20,000 had tried to leave the country illegally to avoid the draft. The source sees that as a symptom of the pressure.
So the analysis seems to be highlighting this big underlying paradox.
Yeah.
That in fighting against a system known for authoritarianism, there's a risk, according to the source, of using methods that start to look a bit like that same system.
That's really the crux of the warning, I think. It's framed as this incredibly difficult tightrope walk.
Which brings us back to that historical parallel you mentioned right at the start, the Prague Spring, 1968. Honestly, that felt like it came out of left field a bit. How does the source actually connect that specific event?
It's quite specific, actually. The source zooms in on the role played by the leadership of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic at that time. Figures like Brezhnev, who had deep roots in Ukraine, Shellist, Podgorny.
Okay. And their role was?
They were apparently quite central in Moscow's decision to intervene militarily, Operation Danube, to crush the liberalization efforts in Czechoslovakia.
Okay. So the source isn't saying modern Ukraine is the USSR. It's using 68 as a kind of historical case study.
Exactly. It's not a direct, simplistic accusation. It's more like, look at history. Here's an instance where a system, which the UKRSSR was part of, used force to shut down perceived deviation or dissent.
Right.
And the parallel the source seems to draw is a cautionary one. It's suggesting that some methods used today, even for different, arguably vital reasons like survival, might tap into a kind of old muscle memory of the state using forceful control. Does that make sense? It's about ingrained state practices.
Yeah, Jake, I get the nuance. It's a warning about repeating patterns, even unintentionally.
Yeah.
What about handling the past more broadly? Things like recognizing the Holodomor as genocide. That's hugely important.
Undeniably important for national identity, for justice. The source acknowledges that, of course. But even here it adds another layer, another, let's say, critical note. It warns against what it calls vengeful nationalism, suggesting that sometimes the focus on symbolic acts, however justified, might seem unbalanced against urgent practical needs.
And it brings up the cost comparison again, decommunization versus reconstruction.
Exactly. That 50 million versus 150 billion figure comes up again